we'll move on to tonight's subject, which is a Chinese proverb that I saw recently, which is quite indicative of the work, and it's a nice sort of measuring stick to find out where we're at. And so the first line is that a man, and of course includes women as well, and it's just a Chinese way of looking at things, who blames others still has a long way to go on their journey. I think if we can define journey before we go on any deeper on this, to me, it would mean a place where we're at rest, at peace with the self, where there's no longer conflict, no longer a judgmental or a polarized point of view. And so the peace that comes from that extends into the mind, of course, or the whatever passes for the mind. Things get quiet, the body starts to relax, and when the body's relaxing, it can begin to heal itself, of course. When you're under stress or pressure, there's not much you can do, you're in fight or flight. So the journey itself doesn't have to be anything too spectacular, although I think the end result is really worthwhile. But it's, again, impossible for you to imagine the end result if you're still caught up on that first level where you judge others. The next level, according to this proverb, is that the person who judges themselves is halfway there. And then the final line is the person who judges no one has arrived. I can certainly relate that to my own personal journey, where we strongly identify with our own perceptions, points of views and values, and think they're important, they're more important than anybody else's, which is quite common, of course. We think we're right, and everybody else is a little bit suspect. And so we tend to judge others for things that go wrong in our lives, or conflict that shows up in our lives. And that's quite common. When you can see it on the street, you can see it around you all of the time. People are judging others, blaming others for whatever's going wrong for them. And then I went through a time, and the most noticeable time was during a rather uncomfortable separation from a previous partner, where I tended to blame myself more, because I could see that I'd been stupid, I'd been blind, I'd done some sort of really silly things, and so I blamed the self. And that's also quite common for a lot of people, where we blame ourselves for what's going on. Try to remember, though, that if you could have done any different in any past experience where you might still believe blame is, associated with your behavior, if there was any chance that you would have done something differently, you would have. You cannot do more, you cannot do less than who you are at the moment, or who you believe yourself to be at the moment. And because we're all a product of a conditioned past, until we break free of that conditioned past, which would be another benefit from the practice, of course, breaking free of a conditioned past, all the time we're subject to that conditioned past. And it gets a bit sort of complex here, because we have to think that we're strongly affected by any shadow or subconscious aspects of the self. If we look at what Jung talks about and see that these aspects need to be brought into the light of awareness in order to make us more complete and whole, all the time they remain buried in the subconscious, we're a victim to that patterning. And then this also goes along with a lot of Buddhist teachings about how we strongly identify with the body consciousness, thoughts, emotions, feelings, etc. And as long as we're still strongly identifying with the body consciousness, I suspect that there'll always be a shadow. There'll always be karmic charge to be worked through. I think the two go hand in hand. And the more you collapse the shadow, the subconscious, the karmic charge, the more you will let go of your association, your identification with body consciousness. So it's like a catch-22 situation. It doesn't matter which one you let go of first, but it will affect the other quite significantly. And so blaming the self, which is quite common, of course. So if we judge ourselves, then who are we comparing ourselves to? And what do we think we could have done differently in the past that would have allowed us not to have to go into this self-judgment? And I don't think we can do anything differently. We do what we do because that's who we believe ourselves to be. And until that changes, until that fundamental belief changes, we're going to remain a victim to circumstance. And if you're conditioned and you're still addicted to that conditioning, not through any fault of yours, not that you've done anything wrong, but just because that's the nature of the world that we've grown up in, if you still strongly identify with that, then of course you're going to blame yourself because you think you could have done something different. But if you're really honest with yourself, and that's another issue, of course, if you're really honest with yourself, you'll know that you couldn't have done anything different. You couldn't have changed things. You couldn't have said something. You couldn't have done something different. You were just playing out a part that you believed was who you were. And so you can't be judged for playing that part. I think if you were more fully conscious, whatever that might mean, then you could be judged. But the challenge, of course, the issue then arises that if you are conscious, more fully conscious, then you are less likely to do or say things that you could then consider blaming yourself for. It just won't happen. It doesn't happen. The only reason that we're likely to find ourselves blaming ourselves is because there's still shadow that's in conflict. So there's a polarized consciousness. There's still a lot of judgment around good, bad, right and wrong. We hold on to our perceptions, our values, our beliefs. And where they're challenged or someone comes up with an alternative that doesn't meet our requirements, of course, then we start to blame, and we can blame ourselves for not being better. But how can you possibly be better if you're still a victim to the past? I don't think it's possible. So recognizing that is a great step forward into the place where you stop judging the self, because the self can do no different to what it's done. You can't be right, you can't be wrong, you can't be better, you can't be worse than all of these belief patterns that you currently subscribe to. So that's that one. And of course the final one is that the person who doesn't judge anyone has arrived. Well, what does that mean? How many people sitting out there, how many of you can say that you don't judge others, that you don't judge the self, that you don't blame others and you don't blame the self? Just think back to the last time you sort of blamed yourself for doing something or saying something, or you blamed another. And who was it who was blaming the self? Who was it who was blaming another? If not a point of view that you have been indoctrinated into, or that you have inherited or acquired on your journey in life. But whose point of view is it? Where did it come from? Is that point of view better than anybody else's? Is it right? Is it wrong? Does the other person's point of view have no validity at all? And so while we continue to remain in this polarized consciousness of judgment, good, bad, right, wrong, while we prefer some situations and others, while we still judge situations, we will always blame something, whether it's the other or the self. because that's what a polarized consciousness will do. It's still caught in judgment, in yes, no, good, bad, right, wrong. And then you're comparing yourself to some imaginary figure that is just a figment of your imagination, because the perfect person doesn't actually exist. Everybody on the planet is subject to their past conditioning. It can't be any other way, unless, of course, they've reached that state of Buddha consciousness. And then they're probably not going to hang around on this mad place anyway. Move on to the next part of the journey. But we don't really have a choice, and this is something that you should recognize. And then comes the part of acceptance, which is, of course, the opposite of blame and judgment. So you begin to accept, but you can't accept that which you're not conscious of. Meaning, if there's still charge that you carry that's determining or dictating your life, that's buried in the subconscious, then you're not aware of it. You're a victim to it, for sure, but you're not aware that this exists. Because while it exists and you're still caught up in it, then it's very likely that you're going to blame others. As you move along on the journey and you start then to blame the self, that's no better than blaming others. But it is a step in the right direction. But we can't stop judging just because I say it's a good idea. It's got to arise from deep within you. And I believe, from my experience, that it can only arise if you practice acceptance to whatever degree you're able. And this, I have a lot of issues with a lot of the teachings where people tell you what to do. It's like the bloody 10 Commandments, If you're not that way inclined, if you're not understanding, if you're unable to accept or understand, not because you don't want to, because you do want to, because you have no choice, but if you're unable to accept, then you continue to play the part of a polarized consciousness. And you don't see anything wrong with that. And there's a lot of people doing that, and there is nothing wrong with that. That's just the part that they're playing at the moment. It may take them a few more lifetimes before they begin to recognize that acceptance is the way out of the drama. The Buddha says, people have to go through countless lifetimes to reach an enlightened state. He also said that once you start out on the journey, within 3 lifetimes, if you continue to follow and practice, then you will reach that enlightened state. But it's going to take a long time to get to that 3 lifetimes. There's all of the experiences to be had. There's life to be lived. There's all sorts of parts to play in this theatre that we call life, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a part of the journey. That's a part of how we evolve and come to understand who we are. So it doesn't matter where you are on this particular scale, you're where you're supposed to be at the moment, wherever that might be. And this is what you have to accept, because when you accept it, the whole of when you truly accept it completely, not just little bits here and there, but when you completely accept it, the whole of the reality that you believe to be real collapses, because it's only supported by the energy that you put into it. And we've done this in lots of little exercises in the past, whether it's been on a Wednesday evening or in one of the online classes or a hands-on program, that where we change our mind, where we think of something and we notice that as a result of thinking of something, there's physiological change in the body. You can do that. You're doing it all the time, whether you recognize you're doing it or not. And then when you change your mind, physiology changes. Now, how quickly it changes depending upon the amount of energy you've given to the other, the old thought, the old belief system, the old feelings that you used to get. But if you're practiced at this, you can change your mind and change physiology very, very quickly. Very, very quickly, just as fast as you can put a different hat on. And when you recognize that you're doing that, then you can change. You can change at any time. You can change physiology at any time. We don't. We have trouble. We struggle with changing because of some subconscious belief that we were right before, or this is who we are, this is who we were. And if we continue to hold on to those old belief patterns, then of course it's going to continue to show up. And of course it's going to be a challenge. And of course the feelings that you experience, physical or emotional, are going to be quite intense. And you often think that intensity is a judgment or a value related to the feeling being yours. So the more intense it is, the more you think this is your feeling, which is another illusion, of course. But the illusion, which Einstein went on to say, of course, is that it's such a strong illusion that it's very difficult to break out of. Very difficult to realize you're in an illusion. So rather than try to realize that you're living an illusion of your own making, let's come back to acceptance. Acceptance of what is. Acceptance of what you perceive to be. Whether it's real or not, whether it's right or wrong, good or bad, how you perceive the world that you live in. And then what do you do with that perception? If it's a strongly conditioned perception that you've been believing in for many, many years, then of course there's going to be an intense emotional or physical response to that belief, simply because you have believed it and given it energy over many, many years. Doesn't mean to say it's true, doesn't mean to say it's yours. You have come to believe it's yours, which is the battle that most people struggle with when they try to find equanimity or greater peace within. Because the moment they shut their eyes and go into some quiet state, the past keeps bubbling up, the mind gets busy, the body starts to develop all these aches and pains and problems. So they didn't happen overnight. They've been a long time in the making. And who has made them? Well, if you're still blaming somebody else for your ills, of course you're never going to be able to fix yourself, because you'll always look outside for the problem, for the answer, failing to see that you created this. If you recognize that, well, I created this, well, hang on a moment, perhaps I could create something else. How am I going to create something else? What do I want to create? That's another big issue, because if you get into what I want to create, then you have to ask, who wants to create this? And invariably, it's someone who is lost already in insecurity that they want to create something whereby they feel more secure. And so it goes. It's interesting that in our Buddhist class that's just finished, one of the Thursdays we spoke about what the Buddha perceived this world to be based upon, this reality that we live in. And simplistically put, it was said the world is created from greed, fear and ignorance. And if you can, ignorance isn't meaning stupid, it just means you're not fully conscious of who you truly are. You're hiding, running away, creating all sorts of drama, because that's who you believe yourself to be, and that's quite the opposite of who you actually are. And so this ignorance gives rise to fear, which you don't understand. So fear is also, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons that people are afraid, but then out of fear arises greed. You think you need more in order to feel safe. So you're in this lifelong, could be many lifetimes long pursuit of more sex, drugs, or rock and roll, more food, more power, more money, more clothes, more shoes, whatever, always more. And there's never any end to that desire, because it doesn't meet the needs that you feel you need met. So that becomes a real issue. And so again, by practicing simple acceptance, and that's all you have to do, on a moment-by-moment basis, you can spend a few minutes a day sitting quietly, think of a situation or a person, and notice how it makes you feel. Notice if there's any physiological change when you put your attention on someone or something else. And if there's a change, just notice it. It's a change. And then put your attention on something or someone else and notice if there's another change. After a while, you get pretty good at that. And also, of course, what happens is that the more you notice these physiological changes as a result of the changing of the mind or the focus, then you stop giving energy to that which you notice. This is important. Stop giving energy to that which you notice, and eventually it will cease to present itself into your world. And if you really want to dive into this, you should do some space clearing classes, because that is a really powerful means to help you recognize that just about everything that you notice or you feel has got nothing to do with you at all. And the longer you keep denying something or giving something energy, the stronger it's going to get. I've told many of you the story about working with some pretty dark, what would have been considered dark energies, you could even say evil, that I've come across in my years of space clearing. When I'm able to accept the feeling without blame or judgment, without identifying with it, then that frequency that I was classifying as dark or evil collapses. When it collapses, it means that I will never meet it again, because I'm not projecting it, I'm not presenting it, I'm not creating it, because I have accepted it and collapsed it. And this happens in all areas of your life. What are you struggling with? What do you find uncomfortable? What are you challenged by? What would you like to change? Now, of course, all of those things, those feelings that you might want to do this or that about, they all arise from this place of ignorance about who you truly are. They all arise from a place of insecurity, which is a byproduct of a polarized consciousness, which means you've got this inner conflict going all the time between good, bad, right and wrong. So all the time there's that conflict, you will be caught up in very uncomfortable situations, having to deal with uncomfortable situations, and having to pay the price. And then maybe, just maybe, you'll start to blame the other, or you'll blame yourself for these uncomfortable situations. If you could have done differently, you would have done differently. Stop beating yourself up for being a product of the past. We're all products of the past.